Okay, I'd like to introduce Trey Lotz, Class 8, OT8, 43 years. 43 years as a full-time auditor, right? He audited over 43,000 hours. Wow. He did 3 flag internships. Was they all right on the ship?
2 of them were on the Apollo.
Wow, that's a wow. And we'll talk on second dynamic and how to create a safe one.
Sane.
Sane one. Right.
Same thing.
Same thing. It's not too safe to have a pet. I thought about that. Here I am sleeping next to somebody, and I'm like, or they're giving me food, and I'm going, is this good? She better be safe and sane. Thank you very much. There it is, Trey Lotz.
Well, like Ray said, anybody in the being a field auditor or counselor of any kind, one of the most common things that people want help with is their second dynamic. So I've ended up having a lot of experience helping people repair their second dynamics, setting the groundwork for finding a second dynamic. And I made it a point over the years to always look for different LRH references and things that could apply. One of the key stable datums about the second dynamic is that it is a group, and it follows the laws of a group. It's a small, specialized group, but nevertheless, it's a group. And it's important to know why some marriages work and some marriages don't. Which ones can be fixed and which ones cannot be fixed. It's not true that every marriage can be fixed. A lot of people have studied this subject, and I've always been interested in reading different psychological studies and things like that. And they come up with certain conclusions, and I relate them to little pieces of the tech. And so much of the, one study, for example, studied arguments on the second dynamic. Now, statistically, most arguments in the second dynamic are about money. That's the most common. This is a little bit different. It's just what is the underlying cause of arguments and dissension in the second dynamic. And they found that it came down to 2 things. One person felt unfairly controlled, or one person felt neglected. So, interesting point. A lot of the second dynamic comes down to tone level and comm cycle. And that's something I'll talk about a little bit more. Yeah, another interesting study was by a man who videotaped weddings. And he could look at videotapes of weddings like before and after, a half hour of it. And he could predict which marriages would last and which ones wouldn't. And what he looked at there was how these 2 people related to each other. And some couples got along well and could communicate with each other. And some couples argued with each other. And the other thing that he noticed, the other third category, was one of the 2 people expressed some sort of invalidation or contempt for the other. In other words, the bride rolled her eyes about something the groom did. Well, he predicted that the ones that argued, their marriages would explode in heat. And that's exactly what happened. And he predicted that the ones where one was contemptuous of the other or invalidative of the other, they would actually last a long time, but they would devolve into a Cold War where they were together, but they were completely out of communication. Interesting. So, one of the statistics you often hear is that 50% of marriages end up in divorce. Now, this is actually very misleading because the truth of the matter is that some people get married 3 or 4 times. So, let's say you have 5 people. 4 of them get married and stay married. 1 of them gets married 4 times and gets divorced 4 times. So 50% of all those marriages have failed. But most of the people that have gotten married have stayed married. So the actual statistic is about 1/3 of people that get married stay married. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. 1/3 of the people that get married get divorced. About 2/3 of the people who get married stay married. So it's really a much better statistic than you would imagine. And also people blame this on modern culture, but truth is the divorce rate has been gradually increasing since the Civil War. And it peaked around the 80s and it's been declining. So things are going a little bit more in the right direction, I think. So how do you create a sane second dynamic? Well, here's a definition of a sane scene. When none of the outpoints are present, yet you do have reports and the scene is functioning and fulfilling its purpose, one would have what he calls a sane scene. So what you've got in a sane scene is a functioning group. Now, some people have gotten very bitter on the second dynamic. You're interviewing somebody and you say, how's your first dynamic? And they say, oh, well, work's okay, and I'm healthy enough, I'd like to make more money, etc., etc. I don't get enough exercise. And you say, okay, good. How's your second dynamic? Second dynamic. Ha! Noted. Probably the epitome of pessimism is Woody Allen, who defined marriage as the death of hope. And recently, Rod Stewart, who'd been married and divorced several times, was asked if he was planning on getting married again, and he said, no, I'm just going to find some woman I don't like and buy her a house. So what are really the qualifications for putting together a sane marriage, a sane group? I found that the most pertinent reference is the sanity scale. And the sanity scale is something that L.R.H. Came up with. He talks about it in the Org series. And it's on the third dynamic, but I realized, of course, it really applied to the second dynamic as well. If you take the terms that are more group terms and convert them to second dynamic terms, it really makes a lot of sense. So I'll read you the definition here. A sanity scale are the points of success and failure, the make and break items of an organization. Hiring, training, apprenticeships, utilization, production, promotion, sales, delivery, finance, justice, and morale. And these 11 items must agree and be in line with the admin scale. That's an important point. And here's another very important point. The group will exhibit aberrated symptoms where one or more of these points are out. The group will be sane to the degree that these points are in. Internal stresses of magnitude begin to affect every member of the group in greater or lesser degree when one or more of these items are neglected or badly handled. The society at large currently has a majority of these points out. So you know, anybody that comes to you with their help in their marriage, of course, is experiencing internal stresses of magnitude. And, you know, you can usually, once you understand the scale, you can kind of like look at which points are out on the scale. And that way you can really help a person repair their marriage. So, as I said before, tone level is very important. So, you know, in an org, they will hire somebody who can be trained. So, who can't be trained? Well, basically you get antisocial people who can't be trained because they can't learn. And how that manifests on the second dynamic, people that would automatically become poor choices for any kind of a mate would be somebody who's criminal, a person who's involved in substance abuse, somebody who's emotionally or physically abusive, someone who can't work. And the last big telltale factor is somebody who has no history of any kind of a stable 2D for whatever reason. So you have to hire somebody who can be trained. Now hiring, you know, in the second dynamic arena would be dating, really. You try to get to know somebody to see if you want to go any further with it. See, you know, you've got this org board that you want to create, a family org board or a relationship org board, and you have this spot over here that you want to find somebody to fulfill that spot. Now, Ray made a good point about not having that spot empty. And there was I remember back in the 80s, I would do this drill with people. I did it myself. And, you know, was there anybody filling that spot? You look at that spot, and I said, oh yeah, who's that? And I said, oh yeah, I remember when I was like 6 years old, and there was this little girl down the street, Carol, and she was so cute, and I was sure I was going to marry her someday, and she was still posted up there in that spot. Okay, well, so I left the spot open, and you know, you never know what people really want on the second dynamic. You know, what they say they want, what they really want are really two different things. I mean, Elright says, a lot of people say they're looking for a partner, but they're really looking for an opponent. I remember when I first met Nikki, my wife, 30 years ago, I started talking to her by accident. I called somebody's house that I knew, and Nikki picked up the phone and we started talking. We talked for like an hour, and then I called back the next night and we talked again for another hour. We got together and we had some dinner together and talked some more. And at some point she said, oh, do you have a girlfriend? You know, and I said, yeah, I had a couple of those. And she said, how about a wisecracking sidekick? And we've been together ever since. Now, there's an interesting old saying that opposites attract, but studies have shown that while that may be true initially, relationships based on opposites normally don't last very long. And there's a good case reason for this. You get into your GPM track, and eventually you become enemies. One of the big mysteries of the second dynamic is how somebody that started out as such a close terminal could end up being so much of an enemy. And there are answers to that, and I had to figure that out. What really works the best on the second dynamic is having similar values. If you generally see things the same way, and you've got sort of a basic understanding of life that's compatible, then you can work through the differences, or, you know, reality differences and things like that. Those become easier to overcome. But anyway, you know, finding a second dynamic terminal, it isn't just finding somebody else. it's also being a good second dynamic terminal. So there's a lot to be said for making yourself eligible to be married. I often tell people, well, you know, don't try to start a 2D with somebody who's not eligible to start a 2D. You know, people, you know, get attracted to a married person or something. You know, that's no way to start a 2D. It just doesn't work. And it's interesting about soulmates because Ray gave you a lot of data on that. I ran across a tape. I'd only heard about soulmates in the tech in the PTS bulletin, where Ellery said true love soulmate could be a PTS situation. But in another tape, he says, you know, sometimes you run into some being that you really just hit it off with, and because maybe this is somebody that you know in a past life, or maybe it's just somebody that's on your same wavelength. And he says such people, such terminals, can be either the source of great satisfaction or great frustration. And you know, we've all seen you know, true love relationships deteriorate into bitter enemies. Well, I mean, you could say that you know, back on the track you had a certain game, and you know, you found that person again and you started playing that game again. Well, if the game was below 2.0 on the tone scale, well, of course that's where it's going to end up landing once the glow wears off. You know, but in any case, the thing in life is you can never really move backwards in life. You always have to move forward. So whatever you had in the past, it's really a mistake to try to recreate that. It's always better to create in a new unit of time something that you really want in a new unit of time. One of the biggest things that I've found that helps to create a second dynamic, a stable second dynamic, is that the individuals involved in it are responsible for their own emotions and feelings. Whenever you get into you're causing me to be unhappy or you're making me mad, you're saying your cause, I'm effect. And you know, it's important to talk about your feelings, and that's why, you know, marriage counselors, you know, tell people to say, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that, not you did this or you did that. In fact, in one early bulletin, Ellery says that the single most important discipline in a relationship, if you're trying to sort out a problem, is that nobody gets to use the word you. That's good advice, believe me, it works. So, LRH talks about how to create a cause-cause relationship. Now, since a person is a spirit with a mind occupying a body, a good relationship really exists on all three levels. It's good spiritually. You admire the person's values, you admire their goals, you admire their character, their ethics. On a mental, emotional level, you have some similar interests, maybe similar comlags, similar backgrounds, similar data, something that you can relate to each other well, emotionally supportive of each other. You know, corrosive emotions, as we said earlier, only lead to a person becoming an opposing person or an enemy. When you're invalidated or cynical or mean, it just creates space, and when you create space, you lose intimacy, so why be there? And people can stay in relationships that no longer exist. They can stay into the end of time, but the truth is the marriage is gone. And even on a physical level, it's a lot more than sex. The important thing about sex is that you're compatible with each other. If you have a high sexual interest, or then you should be with somebody who has that same level of interest. If you have little or no sexual interest, you know, it's probably better to be with somebody who doesn't have that level of sexual interest. One interesting study said that people that are sexually bonded have a much easier time in overcoming emotional conflicts. So it definitely adds to the stability of marriage to maintain a good physical relationship as well. But a physical relationship really amounts to a lot more than that. It amounts to surviving physically together, which means the space you live in, you know, all of the mechanics of life, clothing, food, bills, shelter, transportation, all those things. That's, you know, being able to survive well on a physical level. If you have all three of those things, you've really done a great job. Now, there's a great little paragraph here I'm going to read to you from this tape called the Dynamics in the Tone Scale. He says, let us suppose that an individual decides to take part in the meshed universe, and he is unfortunately so low in the tone scale through having met with certain unnamed and unthinkable experiences that he is able only to be a small portion of the back of his own neck. In name only, he has control of his entire organism, but feels out of touch and out of control with it, with all of it except for a small part of it. So this is somebody, you know, kind of low on the tone scale, low on the bridge. There's a lot to be said for going clear. You become cause over your own first dynamic. Your mind is under your control. It's not doing things you don't want it to do, and it does do things you do want it to do, and you know, you have pretty good control over your body, even though really the body is also the genetic entity. But you know, okay, so you have a good relationship with your genetic entity. You have a pretty good mind. You're doing well spiritually. So you're at cause over your own first dynamic. So then, Elred says the ideal second dynamic involves a cause-cause relationship. So what does that mean, really? You get together with somebody and now you're cause over their life. Well, he doesn't really mean that. What he's talking about there is primary cause and secondary cause. Because you're primary cause over your own life, your own first dynamic. When you get together with somebody else, you can become secondary cause over their life. And what does that mean? There's an excellent, in fact, my favorite definition of auditing is monitoring the activities of another without interfering with them. And he defines similarly on the second dynamic what a cause-cause relationship, in that you're primarily cause over your own behavior, but you're aware of the other person's activities without feeling a need to control them. And that is a cause-cause relationship. And he says this requires a high degree of agreement on goals and purposes and how to achieve them.